Thanks for joining us here on 9 News Plus. I'm Chris Bianchi here with 9 News health expert Dr. Payal Kohli. Buffalo Bills safety Damar Hamlin is in critical condition after he made a tackle. He then stood up and collapsed on the field, suffering cardiac arrest and having CPR administered to him on the field. Obviously a very, very striking incident that we saw back on Monday night in the first quarter of a football game. Dr. Kohli, thanks for joining us here. Based on what you saw, what happened to Damar Hamlin back on Monday night?
It's going to be impossible to tell in this particular case without additional testing. You would want to get an ultrasound of the heart, look at his EKG, know what the initial rhythm was. But from what I watched, I could speculate that the most common cause of cardiac arrest in young, otherwise healthy athletes is actually something called a cardiac arrhythmia, which is an electrical problem with the heart. And if you think about what they're doing out on the field, they're a bit of a setup for an electrical arrhythmia because, their catecholamines or stress hormones are amped up because they're playing a game, their fight or flight response is high. That can lower your arrhythmic threshold. That can make it easier to trigger an arrhythmia. They're sweating a lot, which can cause electrolyte abnormalities as well. That can affect your risk for arrhythmia. And then in this particular case, what really struck me was the fact that he sustained a direct blow to the chest. And there's this condition called commotio cordis, which has been described, for a long time, where if the blow to the chest comes at the vulnerable part of the cardiac cycle, so our electricity, beats and then resets, and our heart beats and then it resets. But during that reset, there's a small little period that's a vulnerable period where if there's an electrical disturbance, such as a blow to the chest that can cause the electrical wires to misbehave, or even somebody startling you, in fact, at that right exact moment, it can basically blow a fuse in your electrical system. It can cause the electricity to go haywire, which then causes the heart to stop. Because if the electricity is not working, the heart's not beating, and that could cause a cardiac arrest. So, I don't want to speculate too much, but that's what it appeared to be because he stood up for a few seconds, which was probably still the blood circulating to his brain from his last heartbeat. And then, of course, the heart stops immediately, and that's when he collapsed. Now, the fact that they used a defibrillator when they were resuscitating him also suggests that there was an electrical problem with the heart. Because other things that can happen when somebody has blunt trauma to the chest is there's a big blood vessel that carries blood out of our heart called the aorta. If you cause a tear in that blood vessel, that can be catastrophic because it carries your entire body's blood. But that's something that would require surgery and would not require defibrillator. So, it's very hard to know exactly what happened, whether he had a genetic predisposition, whether he has a cardiomyopathy or a structural problem with his heart. Those are outstanding questions. But at this point, it appears to be most consistent with possibly commotio cordis, where trauma to the chest can cause an electrical disturbance when it comes during that vulnerable period.
How common is it to see commotio cordis?
Pretty uncommon. And there's only a few cases reported every year. There's a registry now that they have for commotio cordis to try to figure out trends in it. We tend to see it more in men than women. And that could be maybe because they're more male athletes. We tend to see it usually before the age of 20 as well. After 20, it's a little less common. Again, perhaps because of the degree of athleticism. Certain sports we see it more in. Baseball, lacrosse, sports with balls that are flying at high speeds, because the velocity of the impact, how hard that impact is, and the location of it are all factors that can result in commotio cordis. We also believe, however, that it's underdiagnosed, that more people may have it and not necessarily realize it. Now, this was caught on camera. It was sort of very clear what happened. But, I had a case during medical school where somebody's child hit them in the chest with a toy. And it just caused commotio cordis. So clearly it wasn't necessarily a very high velocity impact because it was a child, but it happened in the right part of the cardiac cycle and caused a cardiac arrest. And that didn't come out until many days later when that person woke up and started telling the story. And so it's possible that we're also underdiagnosing it.
I should also say, I kind of want to emphasize that this is, a lot of this is speculative, so, we'll learn more in the coming days. So just for those of you out there, there is a degree of speculation going on here. That said, it sounds based on what you said here, and I don't want to oversimplify this, but it sounds almost kind of like a bit of a freak event, doesn't it?
A commotio cordis, if that's what it was, is really it's just a terrible accident, and it's the stars aligning at the wrong time to create this sort of a thing. And like I said, there's certain factors that could predispose us to it. So if his potassium levels were a little bit altered because he was sweating a lot, if he was a little bit dehydrated, if his stress hormones were amped up, all of that can certainly set him up for it. My most important questions as a cardiologist, now that his rhythm has been restored, his heart has started again, are what is his neurological recovery? In other words, whether or not his brain activity is going to be salvageable or not. And that really depends on the type of CPR he got, whether it was high quality CPR or not, and when it was started. And then from a cardiac perspective, is there something wrong with the way the heart looks or the way the electricity moves through the heart that set him up for this event? Because not everyone who gets hit in the chest will have commotio cordis. So of course it's that right critical period, but there's also certain people who have what's called a long QT, which means the time it takes for the heart to reset after every heartbeat is much longer. So if you just have a longer susceptible period or vulnerable period, you can imagine that could predispose you as well.
Is there a way to know that, whether we have this longer research?
Yeah, an EKG, an electrocardiogram, which is an electrical map of your heart. So this is actually very controversial with the American Heart Association and the European Heart Association not agreeing whether every athlete, before they go into pro sports, should get a screening EKG or not. The downside, of course, is getting false positives and preventing people from participating when nothing is wrong. But the upside is that you could potentially pick up long QT syndrome or some other, what's called a channelopathy, a problem with the way the electrical channels work in your heart that sets you up for a cardiac arrhythmia during competitive sports. So in Europe, they do screen everybody with an EKG before competitive sports. And here in the United States, they just do family history, genetic history, and then they only selectively screen with EKGs.
Could there be some sort of a solution? Let's say that there is this arrhythmia that's discovered in future athletes, that you could add padding, for example, around a chest for those players that are... I don't know, because you said it was the velocity of the ball or the velocity of the hit in this instance that may have led to this. And again, I'm purely speculating here. You're the expert. Is there some sort of physical potential solution that could blunt that or fix that? Or,
across the board, I think unlikely that more, padding or such could prevent that, because the trauma could obviously still, as long as it hits the heart, the precordium, the front part of the heart at the right spot. It doesn't always have to be a high velocity impact. But if somebody were found to have some kind of a genetic condition, there are athletes, for example, in whom we put in defibrillators. These are called ICDs, implantable cardiac defibrillators, which sit inside the heart so that you have your insurance policy. Because the faster you get that heart restarted, the faster that electricity kind of resets itself and the circulation starts perfusing again, the better your prognosis. So that's a potential option that we can sometimes do for people. Now, it may, obviously, I'm not sure what this would mean for his future participation in the sports. It sort of depends on what ends up on the medical workup, if he ends up having an underlying predisposition or if this just ends up being completely commotio cordis, which could happen to any of us. Like I said, even if you get startled at the wrong time, it can cause that problem. But I do hope that it raises a bit of a red flag in all of us that we need to know CPR, because the person sitting next to us, a friend, a family member, a coworker, anybody could have this kind of a thing happen to them out of the blue. And it is something that high quality CPR can really change the prognosis for.
Best, simplest way to learn CPR, Dr. Kohli?
Very easy. There are courses at YMCA, at the American Heart Association website has them, the Red Cross has them. You can even talk to your doctor and see if they can recommend some resources for you to get a CPR class. Try to get your friends and family members to learn it as well, because, obviously if something were to happen to you, you would want the people around you to know it. And that high quality CPR can double or triple your chances of survival after this kind of a cardiac event. And we know that sudden cardiac arrest can happen obviously in competitive athletes, but it is also can happen in regular people, in young, healthy people. Now, as you get older, your risk for sudden cardiac arrest goes up because you start to get structural abnormalities in the heart starts to change. You can start having blockages and things that can predispose you to those types of arrhythmias or problems. But like I said, really important to know how to do that CPR. The other thing to keep in mind is to know your limits when you're doing CPR. So if you're doing CPR on a big football player and you're, a 5 foot tall, 100-pound woman, your quality of CPR may not be adequate. So all CPR is not created equal. You really have to give high quality CPR because you're basically pumping for the heart when it's stopped. You're making sure the heart is still sending blood to all the organs. And so you have to compress that chest at least 2 inches, which is a lot for compressing a bone. And you have to do it 100 to 120 times a minute. And you got to kind of, lock your elbows, get on top of the person. And fatigability is high. So you can probably do a few cycles of CPR, at a high quality rate, but you need to rotate who's doing CPR. So you really ideally need multiple people to be CPR trained around you because, as I said, it can take several minutes to get the heart restarted, to get those medications circulating, to get the defibrillator on board. And during that time, you've got to buy yourself time with that CPR.
Damar Hamlin, but my understanding is that CPR was administered for 10 minutes. Is that correct? Does that tell us anything?
That's not an unreasonably long length of time. In fact, for hospital arrests and once the medical personnel gets there, the mean or average time is about 12 minutes for CPR. So as long as he was getting high quality CPR, I'm not sure that necessarily affects his prognosis too much. We generally tend to see an inflection point around 20 minutes, meaning if you've been down for 20 minutes, getting high quality CPR, getting the medicines, getting all the parts of the algorithm to resuscitate you, and you don't have return of spontaneous circulation, your heart has not restarted again, that could potentially mean that your prognosis is a little bit worse, both from a neurological perspective, but also from the fact that the heart's not kind of restarting as quickly as it should. Now, we have seen some people even at 30 minutes or such have good prognosis and good recovery. But one of the big reasons that, there's a 90% fatality for an out-of-hospital cardiac arrest is because people aren't getting CPR, high-quality CPR. People aren't getting the kind of medical attention that he got. So I'm really hopeful that for him, he's in that 10%. He has factors that he got the CPR right away. He returned circulation within about 10 minutes. Hopefully these are all factors that will work in his favor in terms of his overall prognosis.
An unfortunate question that I have to ask here, but there were some pretty implication-laden social media posts last night from some prominent right-wing anti-vaccine voices last night, on Monday night, that the vaccine may have had something to do with this. Is there any indication that was the case?
No, not at all. And I don't know his vaccination history, but, vaccination has obviously, COVID vaccination has been implicated in causing a slightly higher risk of myocarditis, which is inflammation of the heart muscle. But he would not have had silent or asymptomatic myocarditis. In other words, he wouldn't have been out there playing a football game feeling fine when he walked onto that field. If he had myocarditis, he probably would have had some symptom, shortness of breath or chest pain or something else. So if there was any role for that vaccine, which I don't think there was in this particular case, but he wouldn't have been completely asymptomatic walking onto that field. So I think that people are connecting, two unrelated things. We don't know in his particular case whether he recently had COVID, which we know has been linked with cardiac inflammation as well. We don't know, again, what his baseline EKG looked like, what the structure and function of his heart looks like. Those, to me, are more relevant questions than whether or not the vaccine caused this. There's just no reason to believe that a vaccine would cause a cardiac arrest. And at this point, we've studied literally, millions and millions of people who've had the vaccine, and we have not had any reports in the adverse event database of cardiac arrests coming as a result of the vaccine.
All right. Any final thoughts about what we saw with Damar Hamlin and going forward?
As a cardiologist, obviously I've seen so many cardiac arrests, but it just always, takes my breath away and really reminds us about the fragility of life. Even young, seemingly healthy, highly competitive athletes. So my thoughts and prayers are with him and his family, and I'm really hopeful for an optimistic recovery. The next few days, I think, will really be telling with his neurological recovery as they kind of wean him out of the coma that he's in. He's in a medically induced coma right now. We'll sort of see what his brain activity is like. If he's following commands, they'll probably get an MRI of his brain as well. And then, of course, as I mentioned, they'll be doing a cardiac workup to see if there was some reason besides just the commotio cordis that he was set up for this to happen, because that'll also affect how they treat him moving forward.
We'll find out more in the coming days, but we certainly all echo your thoughts and our thoughts and prayers with Damar Hamlin. But Dr. Payal Kohli, thank you so much for enlightening us and giving us some insight about what happened on Monday night. Thank you.